So as I'm starting this video, I want to be completely honest with you guys about my thought process. All this video is a giant opinion piece based on my own personal experiences. And I feel like no matter how I rank this list, people are going to be ridiculing me for it. If I say that the 2010s are the best, people are going to say that I'm biased just because I'm young. If I say the 2000s are the best, people are going to say it's only because I'm a millennial. If I say the 90s are the best, people are going to say it's because I'm a secret Jordan stan. If I say the 80s are the best, people will say it's because I run an old head channel. And if I say that the 70s are the best, people will just say that I must have a coke addiction. Simply put, this is the kind of list where there's no winning regardless of how I rank it. There is no objectively correct answer when it comes to this, but these are just my opinions based off my own personal preferences. So let's make this a fun activity, and please let me know your personal opinions and your personal preferences in the comment section below. One major piece of clarification before I continue. I am not ranking this list purely based on the talent and the quality of the players, but rather I'm ranking this list based on the NBA product as a whole, like how good the players were, how diverse were the styles, how entertaining were the broadcasts, how passionate was the competition, and so on. In my most simple way of phrasing it, this is my ranked list based on how enjoyable each decade was, from the least enjoyable to the most enjoyable. Makes sense? Awesome. Without further ado, let's get into it. First off is number 7. The worst decade of NBA basketball is the 1950s. I feel like this is the first choice for obvious reasons. The game was just so archaic at this point that many of the fundamentals were still being developed at this point. Many players didn't even have a jump shot in their arsenal and remained completely flat-footed while shooting perimeter shots. Going back and watching some of those older games are really tough at times, as field goal percentages were significantly lower league-wide, and the ball handling skills were so far from what they are today, generally speaking. In many ways, you still had the color barrier affecting the level of talent within the league, and without the game being widely known to European players, the game was severely lacking global competition as well. I'm not saying it was all bad. You still had beautiful passers and ball handlers like Bob Cousy, and you still had skilled big men like George Mikan with his incredible ambidextrous hook shots. But regardless, when you look at the bigger picture, this decade just hasn't aged as well as many of the others on this list. Number 6, the 1970s. Although this decade was significantly more talented than the 1950s, the 70s was still the decade that put pro basketball on life support and nearly crashed the brand entirely. Without any back-to-back champions, there was a real lack of identity within this era, and is often referred to as the decade of parity. But although that was a significant issue, that was far from basketball's greatest problem in the 1970s. In those years, both the NBA and the NBA had significant issues with drug abuse, and on-court violence was a pretty regular occurrence as well. What does keep it out of contention for the worst spot on the list is the fact that that era was still immensely talented, with guys like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Julius Erving, John Havlicek, Pistol Pete Maravich, and so on. Don't get me wrong, it still had some areas of appeal, and I probably still would have been a basketball fan if I was alive in the 1970s. But compared to the decades ahead of it, it left a lot to be desired. Number 5, the 1960s. Obviously, basketball did not have the same level of popularity during this era, and it wasn't close to having the same level of accessibility for the average basketball fan because there was fewer teams, meaning fewer cities had pro basketball to watch, and frankly, most NBA games were not even caught on film. The top 25 greatest performances of Wilt Chamberlain's career, we don't even have any footage of, which tells you just how limited that era was as a basketball fan. Then you have to consider the fact that free agency didn't exist yet in the NBA, meaning that once a player was drafted, that player was owned by that franchise forever, or at least as long as they wanted him. But if you're winning with these players, why would you feel inclined to trade them at any point? This is why a team like the Boston Celtics was able to win 8 straight championships. Because they were good and they stayed good, and no one else could do anything about it. With that being said, there are some incredible things about this era that puts it ahead of the 50s and 70s. For example, the rivalry between Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain was truly awe-inspiring to all who witnessed it. These two were some of the most incredible athletes in sports history, and they just so happened to be playing in the same era as competitors. Then you add in the other talented greats like Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, Oscar Robertson, Bob Pettit, and Nate Thurmond, and so on. And then concentrate all of that talent to 9 or 10 teams in the league, and you have one truly competitive sport. It definitely had some major drawbacks, but there were several aspects that made it very special as well. Number 4, the 2010s. Some young basketball fans are going to be furious at me for ranking this decade this low, but honestly, it has nothing to do with the level of talent of this era, but rather it has more to do with how the league was ran, and that blame falls on the commissioner and the general managers. During the 2010s, flopping was out of control. Load management truly got its start in this decade, and due to the shorter contracts, player movement became so frequent that it's become rather difficult for fan bases to be emotionally invested in their superstar players like they were in years past. Because although you may buy his jersey, and although you may have a poster of your favorite player on your bedroom wall, by the time summer rolls around, he may be forcing a trade, or exercising a player option in order to head to another city. Another reason I wasn't terribly fond of this era as much as others is because there was a lot of instances where super teams made the playoff experience less interesting. When LeBron James joined the Miami Heat, forming a super team consisting of 3 top 10 players, he was so confident in the strength of that squad that he predicted a minimum of 8 championships. Now I get it, his comments were a bit tongue-in-cheek. But still, you don't make that joke unless you know you're a championship contender night in and night out. At one stretch, the Cavaliers and the Warriors met in the NBA Finals for 4 straight seasons, and it got to a point that it was so predictable that it made all of the playoffs leading up to that championship series pretty boring as a result. Now, with all this being said, there are still many amazing moments from this decade. The 3-1 comeback by LeBron and the Cavaliers is something that we will never forget. The rise of Steph Curry and his 3-point shooting was truly incredible to witness, and it was a monumental and course-shifting moment of basketball history. Add in the beautiful basketball of the San Antonio Spurs, add in Kobe's farewell game, and add in all the great MVP races of that era, and there's truly a lot of great takeaways. But overall, I feel like this more recent decade was very lacking as far as how the product was presented to the fans, which is why it's just outside my top 3. Number 3, the 1980s. Some of the aspects of this era can either be a positive or a negative, all depending on who you ask. This era was insanely physical as the flagrant foul rule was not fully enforced yet in the NBA. So because of this, some teams would implement an unwritten no layup rule, where if an offensive player attacked the basket, the defender had full authorization to hit him and put him on his butt, which would make him think twice about attacking the basket again. This gladiatorial style to the game of basketball might be seen as highly entertaining to some, but just wait until that style results in an injury to one of your favorite players. If I'm being completely honest, I think the hard fouls of the 1980s have been very romanticized as time has gone on, because I remember watching countless VHS tapes of that era, and back then, no one outside of Detroit had any love for the Bad Boy Pistons' physically punishing style of basketball. Now, one of the major pros of that era was the fact that there was a lot of unselfish team-first leaders like Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, and Isaiah Thomas, who led their teams to be championship contenders while having beautiful ball movement where seemingly everyone got involved. The general style of that era was extremely fast, as many of the best teams in the league were in love with transition plays, which I personally always thought was extremely exciting. Another plus of this era was the fact that it bolstered the greatest rivalry in basketball history between Birds Celtics and Magic's Lakers. This dynamic rivalry captivated the American audience and essentially saved a struggling NBA from imploding. With that being said, the balance of power was somewhat off, as the Eastern Conference was way more loaded than the West, which is why Los Angeles was representing the West in the finals nearly every year of that decade. Although the styles of basketball were highly entertaining, there still wasn't quite enough three-point shooting for my liking, as the league was still adjusting to the three-point shot being implemented in 1979. Ultimately, it's a decade that's still near and dear to my heart, but there's just a few too many drawbacks to keep it from being in one of the top 2 spots. Number 2, the 1990s. A lot of people are going to be mad at me for this one, because many fans view the 1990s as the golden age of basketball, and especially a lot of people who watch my videos. And from a certain standpoint, I get it. It had the player who most people believe is the greatest of all time. The NBA on NBC broadcasts were absolutely incredible. And from the perspective of NBA Finals viewership, it's never been higher than it was during that decade. With that being said, I do think there were a couple negatives that kept it from being in my number 1 spot. For one, the league was really trying to figure out its style during this decade. In the early 90s, there was much more scoring and much more transition basketball. But as the decade progressed, the game slowed down dramatically due to some rule changes and due to the elite players at the time. General scoring had gotten so low that the league office became concerned and even temporarily shortened the three-point line for a couple of seasons as a way to compensate for that lower scoring. If you've never seen a full game from the 1997 or the 1998 NBA Finals, then I would encourage you to do so. It is literally stunning how much slower the pace of play was during that era. And to the casual basketball fan, there were points that I might even lull them to sleep. As awesome as I believe the 90s were, it is a bit of an acquired taste. One of the most amazing things that it had working in its favor was all the diverse styles throughout the league. You had powerfully dominant centers and power forwards. Then you had skillful bigs who relied more on their finesse. You had athletically gifted slashers and mid-range artists. But you also had superstars who operated mostly as three-point specialists. In that era, every star felt like a unique character of their own, and they were not all shoehorned into playing with a similar style and approach, like many modern stars are in the 2020s. If you believe the 90s are the gold standard of basketball, then I can't knock you for it. But for me, there's just a few things it could have done better, which brings me to my favorite decade. Number 1, the 2000s. To a certain extent, the league was in panic mode, trying to figure out how it was going to live its life after Michael Jordan retired, to the extent that several young stars were now being called the next Michael Jordan prematurely by the media. The thing is, they shouldn't have worried about it as much as they did, because the league was in extremely good hands. Stars like Shaq, Allen Iverson, Kobe Bryant, Vince Carter, Kevin Garnett, Tim Duncan, LeBron James, Tracy McGrady, and Dirk Nowitzki made for a highly entertaining and extremely competitive league. And just about every fan had someone they could root for and relate to. To me, the 2000s were the perfect blend of all the various extremes from the other eras. The game was physical enough to make you feel like grown men were intensely battling at what they do best. But it also wasn't so barbaric that it made you worry about the safety of your favorite player every other night. The game had an inside presence, but it wasn't just that. The game had a mid-range presence, but it wasn't just that either. The game had three-point shooting, but it wasn't too much. The talent of the league was dispersed evenly enough that every season was interesting and surprising. There was also plenty of superstars who took pride in being fierce competitors, and who also took pride in showing up for work every day when they were capable of doing so. If you ask me, this decade was generally the most well-balanced era of all time, which made for an extremely intriguing product from beginning to the end. But if there's one thing that making this list has taught me, it's that we've never had a perfect decade in NBA history, because even though the 2000s are my favorite, it still had its own shortcomings as well, like the Malice at the Palace and how that began softening the league, or like the numerous controversies related to the 2002 playoffs and the 2006 NBA Finals. At the end of the day, it looks like we're still looking for that perfect decade of NBA basketball. So what do you guys think? What sort of mentally unstable, uneducated imbecile am I for my ridiculous ranking of this list? I look forward to hearing your lists in the comments section below. Thanks for watching as always, make sure to like and subscribe for more basketball content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.